first this bend. And now the video. Hi, I am Kedger on Two Wheels, and today let's talk about suspension settings again and once again, preloads. And the second video is because I made a hash of the last one, and I also did not make a hash out of the last one. Let me explain. So, what I neglected to mention last time was that there are in fact two very different kinds of springs for suspension, especially on motorcycles. They're more used both on motorcycles, which is a linear spring and the non-linear spring. Now the linear spring, which is what I have on this bike, and it is what is on the Honda CB650, and I think it's also on the NC700, is a spring where X amount of force always equals X amount of displacement on the spring. So if you put 100 kilograms, it shortens by say 5 centimeters, and if you put another 100 kilograms on top of that, i.e. 200, it'll shorten another 5 centimeters, or in total 10 centimeters. So as you put loads, the spring always reacts the same way. That's why it says it's linear. In that case, for linear springs, it is exactly what I said on the last video. Preload will only adjust the weight balance front to back and not the stiffness, because the stiffness is always the same. That's what it means to be a linear spring. The stiffness is always the same. You can, even when it's fully decompressed, you require the same amount of force to compress it 5 centimeters when it's fully decompressed as when it's nearly completely compressed. It also requires the same amount of force to compress it another 5 centimeters. That's exactly what linear springs is. Let me say that again to make sure this goes in. A linear spring, which is what I have on this bike, on the CB650, on the NC700, and on many other bikes, is a spring where it takes the same amount of weight to compress the spring 5 centimeters when it's fully decompressed, and it is exactly the same weight it will need to be applied to compress it the same 5 centimeters when the spring is nearly completely compressed. When it's completely compressed, obviously it's not going to move anywhere, because it can't move anymore. But until the moment it is completely compressed, you require the same weight to move the spring the same distance. It is equal throughout the range. So it doesn't matter if the spring is very compressed or not, it will have the same behavior. Obviously it's very compressed, and it hits a bump, it will fully compress, and then it won't move anymore, and it will go from a spring to a solid piece of steel which has no compression at all, and you will be flying out of your seat. But those are the extreme cases. Same thing on the other way. If it's completely decompressed, it's not going to be able to decompress more. No, actually it is, because springs can do that. Okay, and then there's the other one, which is the non-linear one. The non-linear ones, and now I'm going to show you the difference between the two. Okay, so here is my Tracer's spring, which is a linear spring. As you can see, the way to see that it's a linear spring is that all the coils are the same distance from one another. I think from the rear is easier to actually take a look at. See, all the coils are the same distance from one another. And this is the RC125, which has a non-linear spring, where you can see the coils are not the same distance from one another. The first three are very close together, and the other ones, the other three, are very far apart. So the more I compress the spring, the stiffer it actually becomes. Whether on this one, I really wish I could show you this, but there's a lot of stuff on the way. It's the same distance between all the coils all around. So linear spring, non-linear spring. The two, okay, that's the difference between the two, and you can see this visually very easily, as we saw. Non-linear ones are different. Non-linear ones, the more you compress, the stiffer the spring becomes. Okay, That's what nonlinear means. There's a few that are rarer, but some people call them the dual rates, where there's a certain rate between, there are two linear springs welded together, where the first half or first third or whatever goes at a certain rate, a certain amount of weight compresses a certain amount of distance throughout that, and then at a certain point it changes, and that rate changes, so the same weight now compresses a bit less, but then it's linear from that point forward. Those are rare. Usually there are non-linear springs and are kind of progressive. The more you compress the spring, the stiffer it becomes. These can be seen, and in case I didn't tell you on the clip, by the distance between the coils. On those springs, when you adjust preload, you are compressing the spring and thus making it stiffer at the same time. And this has advantages and has disadvantages. One of the advantages over the linear ones is that you can adjust spring stiffness easily. The disadvantage is that it makes it harder to predict. Another advantage is that when you go over bumps, if it's a light bump, the spring is very soft, so it can cope with light bumps very easily, but on the harsher bumps it gets really stiff, so it becomes a stiff suspension over harsher terrain, so it adjusts itself. It's different. It has to work with the rest of the suspension, but it's options according to the rest of the suspension. So if you have a progressive spring, then what I said on the last video is not true. In that case, yes, as you adjust preload, in addition to be changing the weight distribution from front to back, you are also adjusting spring stiffness, and this spring stiffness is way more important to the feel of the bike or the car than the actual weight distribution front to back. It's nice to be able to do both, but it's not really going to work that way, so you're actually adjusting stiffness first and the rest is, well, change. So in that case, go check out your bike. Yes, in that case, adjusting preload will make the suspension harder. And that's it. There's no magic, there's no going around this. This is simple physics. This is the formula for a linear spring. The graph of this formula is a straight line. The other one is a bit more complicated because it involves calculus, since what matters is the slope of the line created by that function. So it's not quite the same, it's a bit different. So that's why there's this confusion on the comments. Some people saying, yeah, it's exactly that. Some people saying, no, it's not that. Well, it's true. You're both wrong and you're both right. It depends on the spring you're talking about. Yikes. I never said suspension was uncomplicated, because it's some of the most complicated subjects you can on bikes. And if you have more advanced suspension with the rebound, with the damper adjustments, go to a pro to tune that correctly and you will be amazed at how much better your bike feels. They know best. I'm just a regular guy with a YouTube channel, okay? But generally that's how it works. And to put my mouth where my money is, I just did a video where I went when I took Cage Arena as a pillion, and my bike was tuned wrong. I had the stock one, which is halfway through the ring, and I put 2 clicks to compress the spring further, which is the wrong way to do, because I'm heavier than your usual Japanese guy to which these bikes are tuned for. The hell is going on here? So the bike was wrong. So with my weight on, the bike was already, let's call it, hunched on its rear. So with my weight on, it was very heavy on the rear, and the front felt light. In fact, this lightness of the front was why I went to research this better, because I thought, this can't be right, I'm doing something wrong. And yes, I was doing something wrong. And so I went from +2 in compression to -6, I think, because I had Cage Arena, so it was my weight plus her weight. So I put it just 2 clicks from maximum, and I couldn't really feel much of a difference because I was rolling at slow speeds. But when I tried on a higher speed bend, it just felt much better. It just felt right. But it could have been placebo. Okay, I had just changed it. Let's check it out. I went to work a couple of days and I went faster. And when I wasn't actually paying attention, I did feel the bike better but worse. It was better. The front didn't feel light. It felt a bit more planted during the turns. The rear felt weird. And so I went today and I gave it one or two more clicks. I think so. I'm now maximum -4, which is halfway between the medium and the maximum, I think. I think it has 12 detents or something. So I just took one less and it's much better now. The front is now, when cornering, the front is now planted. Over bumps, when cornering, the front and rear, well, they bounce as this suspension does, but it's no longer the front is very light and the rear is very heavy. Now it's a nice balance front to back. Because previously the rear was so heavy that when I did that change I could not skid my way out of roundabouts, which was something I always enjoyed, going sideways out of a roundabout, going tilting the bike, flooring the throttle and feeling the bike slide slightly. With that setting, with so much compression, the front was just so light, it just didn't do that. The rear had all the weight, so it had all the grip in the world, and the front didn't. So whenever I tried that, I was just shot forward and not sideways. I was very confused about that. Now I can do that again. So yeah, it's much more balanced, and yeah, that's about it. That's the whole thing, and it's really that simple. It's not a very complicated suspension setting, but it's a very important one. That's why it's there on nearly all bikes. So that's it. Cage, you're out.